Hi everyone, my name is Kim C. I'm a university fiction teacher specializing in beginning, intermediate, and advanced fiction, and this is my one-woman Stephen King podcast called The Year of Underrated Stephen King. On this show, I prioritize the underexplored, under-reviewed, under-discussed, and downright underappreciated Stephen King works, but every now and again, Kim C. and her social butterfly nature loves to knock on doors and see who can come out to play. And lucky me, two incredible gentlemen rode their bikes to my side of town to be my constant reader interview guests. Coinciding with the recent and rare blue moon we just had, this is a very special blue moon double episode release highlighting not just one, but both hosts of the Kingslingers podcast, Scott Daly and Matt Freeman. Yeah, you guys, I'm freaking out. I've been freaking out for weeks knowing that this was happening. That it happened, and now I've just pressed the release button. I'm going to burst. I'm so excited you guys are with me today because this is amazing, pure and simple. I can't believe this is real life, and on the eve of King's new novel, Holly no less, the magic is absolutely palpable. Okay, composure. My first guest is half owner of the Doof Media Company and one half of the Kingslingers podcast, which is an incredibly brilliant Stephen King podcast where I go to be a student again. It's that good. But you know this. I digress. Mr. Scott Daly is a longtime King fan and has read and digested 98%, if not more, of King's written and screen-adapted work. He's a bona fide Dark Tower connoisseur who lured his college friend Matt into following the beam and cataloging the entire journey chapter by chapter. They are now in season 3 of their amazing show, and a few weeks back, Scott sat down with me for the best interview in all of Midworld. I was so nervous and excited that I completely forgot to introduce Scott properly at the start of the episode, so I hope this makes up for it. Let's get it, guys. Welcome Scott Daly from Kingslingers to the show. All right, everyone, super special constant reader guest today. Get ready for someone who's absolutely doing the Lord's work. This is Scott Daly from Kingslingers. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh my God, me too. I always feel this is like the roller coaster drop, and I'm like, this is happening.
Any opportunity to nerd out about Stephen King for a couple hours is what I'm gonna happily jump on.
Same Z's. So thrilled to have you here. I'm a huge fan of what you and Matt do, so this is just amazing.com. We are going to jump in with some constant reader questions. I might popcorn around a little bit.
Sure.
But let's start with the very first question we must all reflect on at some point, and that is the very first Stephen King title you read, and how old were you?
Oh man, this is such a tough one because I feel like I have like 6 conflicting memories of this. I think I've gotten it down to what I think is the actual correct first story, and I think it's my dad not really into horror at all, like never really read horror books, but my mom like loves it and would read them constantly. And so all the Stephen King books in my house were my mother's. And I, as a really little kid, I really didn't read them. I was just always kind of fascinated by the covers, which I feel like is a story that like every Stephen King fan says, that like as a kid, they were just fascinated by the covers. But I think I've worked out the timeline. I was about 11 years old, and it was right when Desperation and the Regulators came out. And for whatever reason, 11-year-old me was just endlessly fascinated, not just by the covers of those 2 novels, but by like the concept of layering 2 novels with 2 different authors on them next to each other and seeing that cool image where King is playing up the fact that he's written a Bachman book while everyone knows that he's Bachman. And so for whatever reason, I picked up one of those too. And so the first King book I read was a Bachman book called The Regulators, which is a wild thing, and it's a very wild book. It's a very wild book to be your first Stephen King experience. But it was also like I never really read like an adult book before. I'll call it that. You know what I mean? And I was kind of just fascinated by it. And from there, I didn't read The Dark Tower till a little later, but from there I, spread out and then explored other King books. I think it was probably one I read not too long after that, because I remember I was older than the Losers Club, but not too much older. So I was probably like 13 when I read it for the first time. But yeah, no, it was Richard Bachman's The Regulators. And I don't even think I read Desperation right after that, which you think I would, but I don't think I did.
Oh, that's wild and really unique. I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I don't know
Usually,
why. This is the choices that you make as a kid. I don't know. I don't know.
I love it. Yeah, I was obsessed with the Misery cover, the 1986
Yeah,
original. I would
yeah.
look at that as a little kid all the time, just fascinated by it.
And for me, like the Insomnia one, for me, for whatever reason, I think it's just because it's like it's not even like there's nothing on it. It's like a boring '90s cover that just has Stephen King's name in big letters and then the name Insomnia. But it was just like it was a huge book, and like it was very bright. It was a bright red and white, and that contrast. I just remember sitting on our bookshelf and being fascinated by that.
Oh man, we were just all lured in like moths.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you someone, Scott, who has read everything in the King canon, or where are you on your journey?
Yeah, so I have, with a small caveat to that, is I haven't read Fairytale yet, the novel that just came out last year, and that's because on our show we're doing our third season, and that is going to be our last book. We're kind of doing a King book through each decade in our third season, and that's the one we have slotted for the 2020s. And since that's the only one I hadn't read yet, we're kind of toying with the idea of either reversing the roles between Matt and I, where he reads it first and then I'm experiencing while we go, or just both doing it like a fresh experience thing. And we haven't decided on that yet. So I've kind of decided just to hold off on reading it until we make that decision. I have still like a year left before we have to do that because we take so long with these books. So that's one I haven't read. And then the only other one I haven't read is Rage, which was the one that is the Bachman book that he's pulled from print. And that was like when I was doing, I think back in 2017, I started doing like a sequential reread slash read for the first time. And I hadn't read that one yet. And like, I made the decision at that time basically to just be like, well, if he doesn't want people to read it, I just won't read it. So I've never read that one. So those are the only two. Everything else he's written, I've read. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm not there yet. But yeah, Rage is so far down the list. I'm like, don't
Mm-hmm.
care. We'll save that for way, way later. If like if needed.
Yeah. And I'm not like ever like saying I will never read it. It's just like, it's not something you can easily pick up in the stores, right? You have to go to a secondhand store and get it there. And I don't know. It just seems like it's a lot easier to just honor his wishes if he says, I don't really want people to read that anymore.
So having read everything in King's Canon, which I love, that's my goal. I want to get there someday. I'll be a real boy. But my next question is, looking at all of King's work, are there any titles that you hate or you're just not a fan of, but you notice they get so much love?
Oh
And
no.
and vice versa. Are there titles that you just adore them, but they do not land well with other readers?
This is gonna get me in trouble. No, there's been a title that has gotten like very popular recently, or at least in my estimation recently, amongst like the King content creation community, and that is Stephen King's Revival, which is a book that I don't love, and the people that love Revival are very passionate about it. So I'm scared. I'm scared of what they'll say to this, but I think it's a decent book with a killer ending, and that it's like the poster child of like land the ending and people will forgive you for everything, because it has an incredible, wonderful ending that I love so much. And then like the rest of the book is just it's good. It's not great. Like I wasn't blown away with the book until the ending. And so that's kind of the one that I feel like when I feel like I hear people discussing Revival, I just kind of hide in the corner and don't say anything because I don't want to take anything away from him, but I just think it's a good book with a killer ending. That's all it is for me. On the other side of the coin, I feel like the weird thing about King is you're like convinced that you're the only one that really loves a book, and then like you see someone's list, it's like their top book. Like, I think that the wild thing about Stephen King is even a book like The Tommyknockers, which is a book that I don't really love that much. I think it's okay in parts and then really messy in other parts, is a book that I'll see it. Some people will list it as their number one King book. And I'm just like, wow, isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible that this book that I don't really like at all is someone's favorite book of this author? But the one that always jumps to mind for me was a book that I had never read until I did this reread project, which was Doomakey, which was a book that, you know, I hadn't heard much of. I didn't really have a lot of expectation going into, and I was just kind of blown away by it. I was blown away by the things he's doing with it. I was blown away by it as like an examination of creating art post accident, which is a part of King's life that I was just really fascinated with, you know, from Dark Tower through everything else he was writing in the early 2000s, writing from the perspective of a man recovering from a serious accident. Like, all that stuff just really, really fascinated me. And I just couldn't believe that this book was this good and I was enjoying it this much. And I felt like no one talks about it very much. So that's one of the big reasons I put this on our third season. We're definitely going to spend a lot of time with this book because I love it to death.
Pavlovian response for Doomakey. I'm obsessed. I am obsessed.
Great.
I think it is one of King's most perfect gothic beach novels. I'm so glad you like it and you found magic in it, because you're right. Nobody talks about it. And
yeah.
It is my holy mission, my manic street preacher mission, to get it mainstream. Like, that is the hill I will die on. I'm so thrilled that you like it. Oh my God, that brings a lot of joy.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, you know, I've read it for fun, you know, twice now actually, because I went back and read it again, and I feel like there's always, like, in my mind, I have, you know, reading them for fun and then reading them for the show are just two incredibly different, unique experiences, because you have to. It's not even that you're having to turn your brain on, because hopefully you have your brain on every time you're reading, but it's just like you're paying attention to different things. I don't know. For me, it's always kind of a less emotional experience when I'm reading analytically, because, like, I'm not allowing myself to really take in the emotion of the scene, or if I am, it's like I'm immediately investigating. It's like, oh, this made me feel this way. I have to figure out why I'm feeling this way, because the book is doing something very specific here, and I have to figure that out. And so I'm really looking forward to this book, to really diving into it analytically, because it worked on me on that emotional level. It was a fast, entertaining read, and I know there's a lot of stuff going on in there that I think makes it that. And I'm really interested in both diving into that and maybe answering the question of, like, why it's not a more popular book of his. Is it just that, like, from a setting perspective or a style perspective, it kind of veers away from his usual stuff? Is it, I don't know. I don't know the answers to those questions, but I'm really into figuring it out.
Oh, I love it. I cannot wait to hear your analysis on it, because I agree. It's such a great pick to be picked apart and to be dissected. My hypothesis is that the ending is too slow of a burn for constant readers, perhaps.
Sure.
But yeah, I think if we just change the perspective on it and be like, this is the best book ever, they're just gonna start loving it automatically.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, it's really funny, because it was one of those ones when I put it on the schedule for our third season, I was expecting a lot of, like, what is this doing on here? Especially since I think that it occurs in the same decade as Revival. Maybe that's not true. No, I think it's in the next one. So it was one of those ones where I expected a lot of people to say, like, why'd you pick that? And there was a little bit of that, but there was also a little bit of, oh, Doomakey, thank you. Someone's like, and so, yeah, there's a lot of us out there. There's dozens of us out there that are really, really excited about Doomakey. So
that warms my heart, because that's a top 5 King for me. Might even be like a top 3. So
that's awesome.
That just brings me so much joy to know, like, it's happening. I'm manifesting it. I love that. I'm so glad. So glad that we've got some eyes on it, more people to chat about it. My next question is asking about particular characters in the King canon, like our little buddy Danny Torrance got a sequel with Dr. Sleep. Is there anyone who you feel is deserving of a sequel or a prequel or greater spotlight? Kind of like our girl Holly Gibney. Who would that be for you?
Oh, that's a really great question. It's funny, because my initial reaction to that question is, no, nobody. I like when stories end and I like to move on for them. But then, like, at the same time, I really loved Dr. Sleep. I loved the book. And then I was just absolutely in love with what Mike Flanagan did with the film, which I thought was incredible. So, like, that's a thing that where I would have, if you had asked me before that book came out, is it a good idea to return to The Shining and return to Dan Torrance? I would have been like, no, absolutely not. But he proved me wrong. So I like that we're doing more with Holly Gibney. I've really enjoyed that character. I think his kind of foray into the crime fiction stuff in the 2010s was really, really fascinating to me. I didn't love every single one of those books. Like I think Finders Keepers of the Bill Hodges trilogy is my least favorite, but I really like the character of Holly, and I'm liking that we're still going to do more with her. Let me think. Let me think here. I think like I'm so torn on the Talisman and Black House because on the one hand, like we spent a lot of time on those two books last year, and on the one hand, like I think kind of some of the weaknesses in those stories really rose to the forefront for me. But at the same time, I'm like, I feel like there's just a little bit more with Jack Sawyer, and I'm a little bit bummed that I don't think we're ever going to get to see any more with him, or we're going to do anything else with him. But like the end of Black House is such that like it could be a definitive ending for him, and you could say, oh, he's going to be happy and over here now, and that's fine. But there seems like there could have been more there as well. So I don't know. That's kind of a half answer, but I do wonder if Straub and King had gotten together one more time to write that third novel that I know they talked about for years, what that would have looked like. I think that the most fascinating thing to me on this question is the idea of doing any of the Dark Tower characters is not something that ever would occur to me. Like I see people all the time, you know, on Reddit and in communities talking about how they want more Dark Tower, more Dark Tower, more Dark Tower. I love the world and I would happily read anything that is written in it. I don't want King to write anything more of any of the characters in that story. Like, I think we're good. I think we're good there. I think, you know, I feel like we're in this weird part in culture these days where we just really don't like things to end ever. I mean, we just had an Indiana Jones movie again for the first time in 20 years or something, and we just can't let things end. And I do remember like the announcement earlier the year where the television show Succession on HBO announced that it was going to be their last season, and everyone's freaking out like, why would you end it? What, it's at the best? It's like, well, because sometimes things have to end, and I feel like King wrote the end of his Dark Tower series, and I just don't want to see him pick up those characters anymore. I think he got to a place where he was happy with them, or maybe not even happy with them, but a place where it was where he felt right. And so, yeah, my answer is not going to be like Roland or Eddie or Jake or Susanna or any of that stuff. I think they're good. I enjoyed my time with them, and I will enjoy it again and again and again on my rereads, but I don't want any more of them.
It's fascinating. So good. Now I'm torn with my next question. So, because you mentioned the golden words of Dark Tower, I have a question that's so open and free, and it could go 1,000 different directions. And it's simply, what are your thoughts on the Dark Tower?
It's a masterpiece. It's a messy masterpiece. And they're my favorite kinds of masterpieces. Like, I'm not sure if I would ever like call it as a series like the best written stuff King has ever done, which feels like it's a dig at it, but it's not. It's this thing. I think one of the words we used a lot was it's an amalgamation of his career, but it's not just of his career. It's like it's an ode to the concept of storytelling and to the idea of myth making, and like it's this huge thing that spanned his entire life up until 20 years ago. And so it reflects every spot along his journey through life is reflected in these stories. And so, you know, there's a lot of people that really, really love the first few entries and then like it less as it went along. And like from like a strict narrative propulsion storytelling perspective, I get that. Like, I think the Drawing of the Three is such a propulsive, like young, gripping King novel that just grabs you from the first and doesn't like I get like that's a great book. I really love The Wastelands too. I love Wizard and Glass for, you know, 1,000 different reasons. And then, you know, the last three books change a little bit. They're different, but they're different to me in such fascinating ways because he had this experience that changed him fundamentally, and then he put that fundamental change into his story. And so it starts as a story about a man struggling with addiction, and it becomes a story about a man struggling with their mortality. And it can be both of those things at the same time. And the beauty of it, I think, is they can layer on top of each other in really fascinating ways. I'm endlessly fascinated by it. I just love exploring it because, like, it's not that I'm saying like if you read this book, you understand who Stephen King is as a person, because no, you can't do that unless you actually know the person. But like I think you definitely understand who he is as a storyteller much better. Like what is important to him, and what does he think about his role in this world, and what he does. And I don't know, it just continuously blows me away. And like one of the joys in my life has been sharing it with a good friend of mine who was so thankful that he loved it as much as I did. You're pretty confident going into these things where you're like, he's gonna love it, he's gonna love it, and you're like telling yourself that over and over again, and then one day you wake up and be like, but what if he doesn't? Or what if he's just lying to me this whole time because he thinks the show will be bad? But no, no, it's one of those things that I think it's really hard to sell people on the Dark Tower, because like if you just go through, I did this with my wife earlier this year actually, where like I just told her like the 5 sentence summary of each of these books, and it sounds insane. It
It does.
sounds like the craziest thing ever. And it is, but when you're in it, when you're in the middle of it, it all just works and it all makes sense. It's the next logical progression. Of course, that's what happened. Of course, of course, of course. Yeah, giant robot bear. Yep, I'm there. We're good. It's amazing how he does that. And I think it all comes back to his command of characters. We will go with these people to any crazy shit they go through because we love them and understand them so much as characters in the story. And that's this thing he's always been able to do just so well. And I don't think, I think there are maybe, I mean, it's unfair to say, I think there are more complicated characters than some of the characters in the Ka-Tet that he's written before, but none fascinate me as much as this group of people. And that's why, like, one of the joys of rereading the books is just getting to hang out with them again, even if they're saying the same stuff they did last time. It's great. So, I mean, I could keep going if you want to keep going about the Dark Tower. Have you finished the whole Dark Tower? I don't want to spoil it for you.
Have not.
Okay,
Have
I'm glad.
not.
I'm
Yeah.
glad I didn't say anything then. Okay.
Yeah, great question. No, but it's my first time with the journey. It's my first time with the tower. And I just finished a few months back Wizard and Glass.
Okay.
And I'm not really a genre person. I came to King really, really late in life. And so I was very, very nervous going into this series. But when I got to Wizard and Glass, I was like, my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And I want to ask a rogue question really quick because I'm with an expert. Because I loved Wizard and Glass so much, I found out that When Through the Keyhole is right after Wizard and Glass. It's like this little extra bit there. And I was like, oh, well, I want to read that, even though it's not chronological. And so I've gotten really 50-50. Some people are like, yeah, who cares? Go for it. Do it. Doesn't matter. And other people are like, don't do that. Just stay on canon. Keep going in order. And so I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to do When Through the Keyhole. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on that. Like, does it really matter or?
I mean, ultimately, no, it doesn't matter. Like, you're not going to destroy your enjoyment of a book by choosing to read it in a slightly different order. I don't think so. I like the way we did it was publishing order. And if people ask me, I say publishing order. I think the thing with Wizard and Glass and Went Through the Keyhole that most people, the reason they recommend saving Keyhole till the end is because when you read them in that order, you get this block of like 1,000, like 1,100 pages that is not the quest itself moving forward. And so for a lot of people, that could get frustrating, right? Because Wizard and Glass is in essence a very, very long flashback novel. When Through the Keyhole is likewise, without spoiling anything, a novel in which the majority of it takes place in a flashback or a story or a different time from our Ka-Tet and their central quest. And so if you read them in that order, you could go many, many, many pages and many weeks without, seeing Eddie and Jake and Susanna and Roland really move forward in their quest to the tower. And for a lot of people, that can be really frustrating and they get tired of it. And it's like, okay, I want to get the story going again. So that's why I tend to recommend just do it in publishing order, because then you just move on into book 5 and you get back to the quest itself. But if you're not as concerned with that and you just like the books for the sake of the books and you just enjoy reading them, then yeah, you can read it whenever you want. It does, I think, chronologically take place there. Like it's the Ka-Tet leaving right after Roland finishes his story that is Wizard and Glass. they get holed up somewhere else and he ends up telling a different story. So it will chronologically sit right afterwards. But yeah, it's whatever people want to do. I think like there's too many rules to reading sometimes. There's like and I know people really get into it with their like, there's so many like here's the master list of Dark Tower where here's where you read this book and this book and this book in between these. And I think all that stuff's really fun and people should do it. Not on their first time though. Like
Yeah.
just read the books and enjoy them, and then you can get creative with all the extra material afterwards.
Yeah, I read Little Sisters of Illyria because it's in, of course, I'm drawing a huge
Is
blank.
that and everything's
Everything's
eventual?
eventual.
Yeah.
There you go. Bingo. And so I was like, the hell is this? And so I was like, oh my God, I don't want to read The Dark Tower now. This is batshit and an acid trip, and I don't want to know. And then rereading it after finishing Wizard and Glass, I was like, oh my God. So yeah, you're right. I think I'm gonna do it. And I love the way I've emotionally transformed through my journey thus far. I'm amazed. I'm amazed with, okay, these people are weird and this is strange. I'm really confused to like by the time I get to the wastelands, I was like, I will kill anyone who hurts Jake. I will kill you if anyone touches Oi.
Yeah.
I will kill you and your whole family. Like the love and devotion and passion that just sort of starts to accumulate is amazing.
Isn't it such a fascinating choice that he chooses to begin his magnum opus multi-part book thing with his protagonist allowing a young child to be murdered for the sake of his quest? Like it's the one of the most fascinating choices to me in the world. And he's like making a bet with the reader, which is like, I bet you're still gonna like him. Like he's an asshole, he's a monster, he's a jerk. I bet you're still gonna like him. I bet I can make you still like him. And he's right. And it's one of the most fascinating things in the world to me that he pulls that off again and again and again. I love
Totally.
Roland, and yeah, the love that he instills in Jake through Roland and through just you, the reader, I think is just fantastic stuff.
I love it too. I'm like, I don't get any of this, but I'm on board.
That's the first book. The Gunslinger is such a weird freaking book.
Awful.
I love it. I love it.
I love part 5. Part
So
5
yeah,
I love. Yeah.
it's so weird. It's so disjointed. It's so. I mean, like, there's a lot of people out there that just say, you can just skip it, or
No.
yeah, which I don't agree with at all because it
Yeah.
has this. It has that important establishing thing of who Roland is as a person. I think is paramount to everything that King's doing with him as a character. But I mean, you can tell this is a very young Stephen King intentionally trying to like throw his voice in how he's writing. He's trying to do some more serious. I don't want to call it literary because the shit that happens in it is not literary at all. But he's trying to do like a more kind of self-serious voice, and it's so funny going from that to Drawing of the Three, and it's just night and day. You go from this person who's trying very specifically to do this very specific kind of thing to someone who's, oh, this is what I sound like and I'm going to write this way now, and it's just wild. That's like, I will never forget my co-host's reaction to moving on to Wizard and Glass, which is like, oh, this is a whole different thing now, and I love what this thing is. And it's not like he wasn't liking it before. He enjoyed the first book too, but man, it's so different. I love the Gunslinger for what it is. Yeah, there's moments. I think my favorite moments are part 5 is really great. All the stories of young Roland, I think, are really fascinating as well. But there's some stuff in there that's just like young Stephen King just going with it. And yeah.
I should preface, I don't hate The Gunslinger. I don't, but I was so confused. So I was really like in science observation mode the whole time. And then part 5 grabbed me by the hand and was like, you're in this now, girlies. Try to get out. I loved
Well,
it.
He does that nested structure in the first part, right? Where it's like actually like you start at one level and then you move to a story within a story within a story. And that like it's interesting, but it's confusing too. It's like if you're not sitting here studying, okay, where are we relative to the other parts of it? It's very confusing. And he loves to do that kind of nested structure of stories within stories, but I think it's done the most clumsily in the Gunslinger, to where I remember specifically in prepping for the episodes we did on it to have to like literally write it out. Okay, this is this level, and then we're here, and then we're gonna move back to the like it's a little bit of messy, yeah.
Okay, one last Dark Tower question because it
Mhm.
feels like I have an audience with the Pope, so I might as well ask.
Oh my
So,
God.
okay, I think about this all the time, and this is in the first book, I believe, when he's in Toll and he is with that Sylvia lady.
Sylvia Pittston. Yeah.
Correct. What in the hell physically happens there, Scott? Because I don't understand it. I had to read that thing word for word into my own recording of the Gunslinger, and I was like, I don't understand. I do not get what's happening here. And so I don't know if it's like a physical penetration of firearms or a mystical hovering of firearms. I need to know.
Yeah, he gives an abortion with a revolver. I've
Okay,
always taken it as just straightforward as that's exactly
excellent.
what happened. Yeah. Just absolutely wild choice. It's one of those things that like I guess if I try to imagine like what people would do if this was their first book ever reading King, because like reading this book after you know King, it's still an out of left field thing that happens, but you're kind of just like, oh, Steven. And like the first time reading it, yeah, it's got to be like, what the heck is this? What? Why did this happen? What? And yeah, it's definitely one of those moments for sure.
I thought so. I really did recall thinking, okay, it has to be that. It has to be
Yeah.
that. But I've heard like it can't be that, or no, it's just a metaphor for, and it was
Yeah.
like, okay, that makes me feel a lot better. One less thing I have to think about at 3 a.m.
Well, I mean, that does kind of bring one of the things that I think is fascinating about the Dark Tower, and one of the reasons I love it is that the world building is actually, I don't want to say bad, but like it's not the driving point of his storytelling. The rules of the Dark Tower universe are barely existent, if ever. Like how does magic work? What are the rules to it? You know, we get things about the beam guardians and the beams and but there's also machines and the old ones built up the beams like and it's there's explanations there, but it's all very thin and not focused on. And it's just like for people that love world building, like for I think like the Brandon Sanderson fans out there that love your systems have rules and the rules are clearly defined and then the story takes place within those clearly defined rules, it must drive people crazy because none of it makes sense. It doesn't. And I think I'm the type of reader that doesn't bother me. Like I love that. I actually don't want to spend too much time really defining and you know bordering on what the scope of the world is. So I don't mind it, but I can definitely see how that kind of thing would drive people crazy when they're like just even like a map of Midworld. There was ones that exist out there, but there's all kinds of weird inconsistencies. Like the one that everyone talks about famously in the drawing of the three is that he's just walking the wrong direction or the ocean's on the wrong side. And like I mean you can chalk all this stuff up to just an author making a mistake, but it's so much more fun if you go well or maybe it's some weird magic shit going on in this world. But that's one of the things I really appreciate about it as a whole is that he's never really tied himself down to being consistent with some very specific ideas of world building and mythology and stuff. It's just like he's going to pull it in when it makes sense and he's going to move away from it into something else when that makes sense. And the characters are compelling to where that never really bothers me.
I usually have radical acceptance with all things King, and I do a decent job of swallowing it, but I think I can let it not bother me. But every now and again, I'm always hungry for just a smidgen, like just a little more.
Yeah, I get that. I totally do. I think sometimes it's better to want a little bit more than to get too much. Because I actually do think when King feels like he has to over explain some of the rules and boundaries of the stuff he's making up is when it gets almost a little too silly. I think Insomnia, which is a book I really, really like, is a great example of that, where it's a really fun book. And then we start having to like really try to process what are these little doctors and like how does this stuff actually work? And we have entire chapters where it's just these little guys like explaining the rules of the universe to our characters. It's like, okay, this is getting a little much for me. It's getting a little plotty for me. But no, I think I totally get why people get often frustrated because he builds these beautiful worlds and then there's just a big dark spot where he's like, just don't look there. It's fine. It's fine. It'll be fine.
I do love that. Too little is better than too much.
Yeah.
So good. So good. My next question is in regards to your favorite Stephen King villain or villains.
Okay. I think it has to be Randall Flagg. and I think it's just because King's created him as kind of, he can be a catch-all villain, where he can be some things in some stories and then a different thing in a different story. Like he's great as the walking dude, but then also in Eyes of the Dragon, he gets to be this very traditional fantasy wizard villain that I just love him in there. And the thing I love the most about it is you're like, are these the same guy or are they not the same guy? And that's another one of those King is never gonna tell you type questions. I've seen people say what they really want is like King to write a Randall Flagg novel that really fleshes out Randall Flagg. And part of me is like, yeah, hell yeah, I would love that. I would love to spend a whole book with him. And the part of me is like, oh, I wonder if that would ruin the mystery and the weirdness of all the different various versions of Flagg we see throughout these novels. I don't know. I'm sure he'd find a way to do it compelling if he ever did it. But no, I think he's really fascinating. He shows up all over the place with different goals in mind. We reread The Stand last year, and I just was reminded how much I love him in that story and how much he kind of like perfectly personifies, I think, one of King's central ideas of what evil is this thing that's actually incredibly self-destructive in and of itself. So much through so many of these stories, and I think it's one of the things you see the complaints levied against some of King's endings so many times is that he builds up these big confrontations that are going to happen between these two sides, good and evil, and then invariably evil just screws it up for themselves because that's what evil does. And people usually see that as a letdown or disappointing, and I get that, but to me it's really fascinating. It's very this Tolkienian idea too. Like Tolkien was a big proponent of this idea that evil destroys itself, and I think King subscribes to that very much. Is that there's this inherent selfishness and greed and desire of evil will eventually eat itself. And that, I think that is Randall Flagg exactly. Like we see that in The Stand, we see that in Eyes of the Dragon, like this recurring beat of these characters that like just end up screwing it up for themselves. And of course there's the work of the white and the side of good like doing that, but often it's just those people standing and believing, and then in light of that, evil just kind of crumples. And I love that idea. I love that idea. I think that's a very comforting idea in the world we live in. You know, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but it's very comforting when you look at the world and you say, you know, there's bad stuff here, but hopefully that stuff will eventually destroy itself with its own greed.
Goodwill triumph.
Yeah.
I loved that so much. Like every word just sent me soaring. I too am a huge Flagg girl, and it really just kind of happened subtly where I love the many-faced god. I love the transforming nature of him through time. I love immortal stuff, and I just love that he gets to be a different guy, but with the same agenda every time. So good.
I really would love to talk with you once you finish your journey to the Dark Tower on what your feelings are on him once we get through that, because there's definitely some more Flagg stuff that you'll see through the end of that story that's really interesting and adds a lot of new fun information to who Randall Flagg is and what he represents and stuff like that. So
Oh my
definitely
God.
would definitely love to pick your brain about that once you get through it.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I can't wait because I was blown away where I was like, oh my God, you're Martin. Martin is you. You're Walter. You're the man in black. I was screaming up and down the halls of my home, just like I love it. Anytime I'm like, oh my God, Richard Faraday, just
Yeah.
blown away. It's like he's totally evil, and I shouldn't be excited when he comes on screen, but that's what villains do. We just
Yeah, he's deliciously evil. Well, and then there's the confusion of whether he's the good man, because like this is what I love about King is that he just changes his mind sometimes and he doesn't worry about it. He just does it. And so like if you go through and you read the Dark Tower and he does these summaries before each episode, each book, and the summaries will have information in it that the last book didn't have in it. And it's this fascinating thing where you're like, Martin Broadcloak, who is Walter O'Dim, who is the good man. And I was like, wait, what? No, he's not. And then later he'll contradict that because he's not. That's a different person canonically in the story. But I think he's just like, he's changed his mind and he's unsure and uncertain. And I think that inadvertently adds this level of mystery to this guy, because you're never quite sure who he is and isn't, because, well, the author isn't quite sure either.
Oh man, that makes me just love it even more. Now
Hmm.
I'm just so jonesing. Oh,
Hmm.
thank you for that. So cool.
Have you read the Gwendy's Button Box stuff that Richard Chizmar did with King?
I have not. I haven't done any collabs yet. What are
Okay,
your
yeah.
thoughts on that one?
I mean, they were like they're very short, very small books, so they're like day reads. So like you can't ever like dislike something that you can get through that quickly. It's just fun, quick reads. They weren't my favorite stuff. They have some Flagg stuff in them, which is why I bring them up. But
Oh my God. Okay.
yeah, but in a way that in a way that also kind of continuously confuses or deepens or twists, his role in the ongoing universe. Like it's just like, okay, so that's what he's doing in this story. Huh. I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
Oh, I love it because I thought I had him figured out. I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure you're just a New Testament demon, and we're just gonna let you be that. You just change your face, and your goal's the same, is to destroy, destroy, destroy. But now I love nuance. I'm here for it,
Mhm.
so I'm buckled in now.
Yeah, no. I mean, you've got a lot of fun Flagg stuff coming at you in the end of the Dark Tower and this stuff for sure.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm pumped. I'm into it. Having discussed villains, you did mention endings a little bit, which leads into a rad question I like. In regards to king endings, for the most part, constant readers seem to really just enjoy the journey. Like, there's not a lot of people who flip out too much about endings. However, sometimes an ending can be so dissatisfying, it can ruin the journey. Are there any king titles that may have happened where it just didn't land well to the point where you're like, I'm upset?
I don't think so. As you were talking, I was going through the list of books just to see if like I read that and then he jumps out at me. I was like, oh yeah, that one. No, I mean I'm pretty easy when it comes to endings, I guess. Like I've kind of never subscribed to the King is a bad writer of endings thing. I feel like that was like a meme that got started at some point and then people just propagate it without even really having any evidence to support it or not. Now there's certainly people that like his endings to different levels, of course, but this idea that like this overarching general idea that he's just bad at ending his stories, I just disagree with. I think he's not a planning type writer. He's a pantser, right? He writes by the seat of his pants, and so I don't think the endings of his stories are ever going to have like this vast web of things coming together perfectly because that's just not the way he writes his stories. But I think they're all thematically and emotionally satisfying. Or if they're not emotionally satisfying, that's a very deliberate choice. Like the ending is made specifically that way. You're not supposed to feel good about this. You're supposed to feel frustrated and annoyed about it. And there's people that don't like to feel that way. There's people that read books that they want to get this feeling of satisfaction from an end, or they want to see their hero character fight the bad guy and defeat him. And that's not always what they're going to get. Like, I think The Stand is a book that people seem to really dislike the ending of. A lot of people really dislike the ending. And there's parts of the ending of The Stand that I dislike. I dislike that the book decided to write Franny out of it entirely, basically. But I thought, like, from a thematic standpoint, that ending was profound and beautiful, and I loved it to death. But no, we don't get our heroes don't get to go up and punch the bad guy in the face and beat him down. That's not the way it works. So I no, looking at this list, there's never really been one that's jumping out to me that's saying is like, no, I was loving this book and then I got to the ending and it ruined it for me.
Even Under the Dome?
That's no, yeah. I think Under the Dome is a book that I just kind of enjoyed for what it was, and yeah, the ending's it's all right. But I think it matches the rest of the book for me, where it's all right. I think it's one of those great Stephen King concepts of what would happen if we did this, and it's like this really fun concept where you're like, oh yeah, I never thought about the fact that like it would mess up the environment, it would mess up the climate, and that would change slowly over time, and that's cool, and that carries you a lot through the novel. Of it's like, oh yeah, I never thought about what this would, because it's like being trapped in a town and like the dome story concept. That's like a science fiction classic, right? That was a why am I blanking on the name of the anthology show that I really should know the name of?
Twilight Zone?
Thank you.
It
Why could I not remember Twilight Zone? Yes.
happens. It
Yeah.
happens.
That was like a early Twilight Zone episode, that concept. And so he just takes that and then marries that with the small town thing, and it's a fine story. I don't remember hating the ending though.
I was fine with it too. I really was. I wished it would have been tragic. I kind of wish it would have taken a darker turn personally, but
Mm-hmm.
I was okay with it too. I was like, well, we knew that it was not human and not on this planet, so it's par for the course. It's all right. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
okay. I was okay
Yeah.
with it too. Moving right along here. So, having read everything other than some of the later ones, which ones have you reread? Have you reread them all, or is it just like
No.
for the show, you'll kind of spend some time?
Yeah, so the ones that I've reread the most, I've reread The Dark Tower 3 times, 4 times now, I think, including the one we did for the show. And I've reread it probably the most. I feel like I reread it every few years since I read it the first time, which is a really fun exercise. One of the things I love the most about it is how the story changes for you as you grow up. The first time I read it, I was not much older than the losers. The most recent time I read it, I was the same age as they were when they went back to Derry, which is a really trippy experience. And now we're right in the middle of rereading it again, and I'm now older than these characters, which is again a really weird experience. And I wonder how that's going to change and grow as I do, as I move into middle age and beyond. Like, what am I going to look at these characters like now? How am I going to identify with them now? It's really cool. But those are the big ones that I've read. I've read the Stand a few times, and everything else. I don't reread that much anymore because I'm spending so much of my time reading for shows, and then you have some reading for pleasure you have to do off to the side. So those are the big ones I've read multiple times.
I need to do a big it reread, but I've noticed as I age, I'm much more tolerant of adult mistakes. I'm like, oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
you need a therapist. It's fine,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so, but no, it's pretty fascinating. I need to do a big it reread.
Yeah, and I mean the thing that's great about it is the first time you read it, if you read it as a kid, like you're just there with the kids and identifying with the kids and totally in that world. And then that is kind of how the book operates for you. But when you read it as an adult, especially one close to the age of those characters, like you suddenly realize that this is not necessarily a book about childhood. This is a book about remembering childhood. And this is a book about recalling those moments in time. And it's a book that somehow he managed to do this. He unlocks your childhood, because I haven't forgotten my childhood in the way the characters in the story have, because it's like a magical forgetfulness for them. But you don't remember and think about the specifics of your childhood very much in your day-to-day life. And like the way he writes the experiences these kids have as kids just unlocks the memories for you, where you're like, oh yeah, it's not even that I remember this specific thing, is I remember feeling that feeling. I remember experiencing that thing for the first time. Like, we just this past week read the part where Ben gets out for summer vacation. It's the first Ben chapter where he's out for summer vacation. And the way he writes that is like, oh, I remember that feeling of summer as a kid. I remember that feeling of, this is the longest I am from having to go back to school ever. And I think the line in it somewhere is like, the calendar said we had 2 months, but the calendar was a liar. What we had infinity. It's this the way he writes it, like, you're not just experiencing that thing, you're remembering that feeling. And that's one of the joys of getting to reread that book as an older person.
Oh man, the nostalgia. More fun questions. If you were able to be stuck in a Stephen King setting, what would you choose if you wanted to hang out there? You could do the like Mike Enslin from 1408 route. I think it's Mike Enslin. And go for terror, or you could, head over to North Carolina and hang out in Joyland or something.
This is this is terrible, because like every Stephen King location has all of the normal mundane evils of our world, and then also horrible cosmic evil that's using the mundane evil. So it's like, do I want to live in a place that's canonically worse than the place we live now? Gosh, I don't know. I mean, since we said Doomakey, I think living out there would be pretty great. I would probably steer clear of the house for a lot of reasons, but I mean, like, there's part of me that's like that wants to answer Castle Rock, even knowing what Castle Rock is and the things it goes through and all the things that go down there. But there's part of me like I think that's the fascinating thing about how King writes small towns is that he's relentless about how terrible they are, but like you can tell he loves them at the same time. It's this really fascinating almost contradiction where it's all he knew for a long time and he has this great love for it, but is also like, also these places suck. And so like even Derry is from the first page of that book very clearly made to be like, hey, this place is bad. It's just bad. And we learn very specifically what all the bad parts of it are. But then like he describes it, he goes through like this geographical lesson of what Derry looks like. You can't help but like fall in love with it a little bit too. And yeah, I like saying Castle Rock, saying Derry, saying all these terrible towns that I would never want to live in, but also I would kind of want to live in.
Right? I love that. Very nice answer. Okay, kind of stemming back to readership.
Mm-hmm.
When you speak to non-King folk, people who are like, oh, I don't read horror, or I've never really read a Stephen King book, what's your process in terms of what do you recommend to them? Or do you just not talk to non-King people?
I just tell them to move along. No, that's a great question. And I'm kind of sort of going through this with my wife right now, who has never read a King novel at all.
Oh,
Not
wow.
not really into horror herself very much at all. Has watched some of the movies with me as we've gone through them, but reluctantly and begrudgingly. I think like starting with the stuff that people don't even realize is Stephen King is a great move. Like I think I really like The Green Mile. I think that story made me like openly weep the first time I read it, even though I knew what the ending was going to be. It's just like gets you there. I really love that book, and I think a lot of people have watched that movie and have no idea it's a Stephen King story, just similar to Shawshank. I think that's a great place to start because it gets you. It's like, look, this is a guy who's just really good at writing character, and you can learn this here. And if you want to try the spookier stuff, it's so weird because like I don't even think of King as a horror writer that much anymore, especially after reading all his stuff. Like, yeah, there's definitely some horror books spattered around in there, especially early in his career, but it's so expansive. He's explored so many different things. He's done so many different genres. It's really, really limiting to just call him a horror writer, but that's the perception that everyone's going to always have. Like, you go to a bookstore and every single book he's written is in the horror section, even if it makes zero sense for it to be there. But I think Green Mile's a great one to start with. I was trying to think of some other ones. I think if you want to do horror, I think Carrie's a really good one to start with as well, because I don't know, that's a smaller book, it's a quicker read, and I think he does like the epistolary style with Carrie, and I think that's one thing that the hallmarks of his style that he comes back to again and again throughout his career that I really enjoy. You really get a good sense of his style with Carrie, although it's evolving. I think Carrie he does the thing where he does the parentheticals mid sentence a lot, and he did that a lot in like his first decade of writing, and he kind of cooled off on that as he's gone on. But I don't know, I really like that style. It adds emotion to what you're reading. Like the interjection of thoughts always makes it feel less like you're reading and more like you're experiencing a story. So I like Carrie a lot. And The Eyes of the Dragon for kids, I think is the perfect one.
So lovely, right? Oh my God,
Yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was such a sparkling diamond.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness. I just love his narrative style. I was blown away by Wizard and Glass and how when I read that book, I'm like, who is this? Like, who wrote this?
Yeah.
The narrative style, like the way he could just turn on the elegance or then turn that down and be really, really clipped and short, or like really languid and very dense. And I'm just like, what is going on? Like, how do you do this?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, the Beatles' White Album is them kind of saying, hey, we're really good at music. Let's do every single genre of music in one album and prove to you we're good at this no matter what we can do. And I feel like that's what King's been doing throughout his entire career. Like he spends a lot of time in a certain lane, sure, but he's not afraid to veer off wildly and explore different things and different tones and different styles. It's one of the things I like most about him.
I love that. I love that there are people out there that recognize that and are sharing that message because it's so important. I think the power of pop culture really just has him in a tiny box.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you actually spend time with his work, you're like, oh my God, that is so limiting. Why is he in this tiny little section? I don't
Yeah.
get it.
Did you read From a Buick 8?
I did.
I love that book.
Amazing book.
What a choice to be like, here's a book that I'm going to write, and I'm going to tell you right away that you're not going to find this book satisfying at all. I'm not going to answer any questions you have, but I'm going to do it. Here we go. What a
Right?
choice.
I was like, wow, we're in philosophy class. Damn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dang. Wow.
A lot of people don't like that book, and that's one of those things where I totally get it. Like if you tell me you don't like that book, it's like, yep, I get it.
Yep.
I get why you could find that immensely dissatisfying, but what a fun book.
I was into it. I was loving it because I knew. I was like, oh, this is just theory. This is just you thinking and dreaming and wandering, and you're having us kind of go on this scientific exploration with this troop of cops, and it's just going to be a meditation. And I'm like, I am here for it. Oh my God.
And again, as a response to his accident and his near-death experience, right? It's one of those books that comes out of that experience, and you can totally understand how a guy wrestling with his own mortality and trying to seek answers to questions that perhaps don't have any answers just decides to channel that all into the story. And it's so fun to read it with that perspective.
Totally. Loved it. I'm glad you liked it too. That makes me happy. But if you would have said Tommy Knockers was your favorite, we were gonna have words, Scott.
Was that, I think that was the one where King himself said that there's like a good 300-page novel mixed in there somewhere. And I think I agree with him on that. Like there's a lot of really fun ideas in there. When he kind of goes off and talks about all the different townspeople and their reactions to stuff, there's a lot of fun in there, but it's just so long. It's just so stretched out. It's just such a mess. I really wanted to like it. I really did. There was a hot minute where I was debating putting like one of King's most controversial novels on our list for season 3. I was like, oh, it'd be fun to talk about one that most people don't like. And then I was like, I don't want to talk about this book for 8 weeks. I don't want to do that. That sounds miserable. Like it'd be fun to talk about like once and talk about the ways it doesn't work, but yeah, no, that wouldn't be fun. So no, I grudgingly kind of respect that there's a good story in somewhere in Tommy Knockers, but no, that's not a good book. No.
Agree. I love that main character, Bobby. I think she's amazing. I think she's so progressive and cool, and I love how that novel starts. I love her relationship with Drunky Face. I forget his name. And yeah, there was some great potential in several areas, but then it just turned into a junkyard. Like, I'm just gonna get in the car and go. I don't want to rummage anymore, King. But yeah, lots to appreciate. I was gonna say, if it was your favorite, I was like, I don't mean to yuck your yum, Scott, but we got problems.
See, I think even the people that do list it as their favorite, like I've seen some people like we're running a discussion question this week right now that is, tell us what your favorite Stephen King novel is, but give it to us in haiku format to be like Ben and it. And we've seen some Tommy Knockers come in for that, and every time it is, people are prefacing it with, yeah, I know it's not a good book, but it was like one of the first King books I've read, so it holds like powerful nostalgic memories for people. So I think even the people that really like it recognize it's lacking a little bit of something.
I'll give it to you if it's nostalgic. You get a free pass if it's childhood. Okay. But other than that,
I guess you haven't read Sleeping Beauties because that's you said you haven't read any of the
no collabs yet. No collabs, because I'm excited and I will, but I'm like, how am I gonna, I mean, can you really tell like who's who? I think I haven't gone there yet because I'm like, this is gonna drive me nuts stylistically.
Yeah, I mean, one of the confusing things about that actually is, and we really tried to dive into this when we were doing the Talisman, but basically from everything I've read, when Straub and King wrote the Talisman, they were like trying to ape each other's style. So like the parts that sound the most Kingian, you're like, okay, was that King writing or was that Straub trying to do King, and vice versa? And I've read enough Peter Straub to be able to kind of recognize his style a little bit. It's a lot different from King's. And so there was definite moments where I was like absolutely 100% convinced, like this is a chapter that King wrote. This is a chapter that Straub wrote. But no, I mean, ultimately, I don't think you can truly tell in that story. I think Sleeping Beauties is one of the ones he wrote with Owen, his son. It's not a bad book. It, to me, I don't want to ruin your opinion of it before you've even read it, but to me, it felt like a book that was mostly written by Owen King. That his dad maybe helped out on. because there's a lot of fun ideas in there, and a lot of them feel like Stephen King themes and ideas and stuff. It just didn't move. It was like, of all the books that I read as part of this reread/read project, it was the one that took me the longest. Like, I think this book sat next to my bed for like 3 months, and I would like pick it up and make a few pages into it and then just find something else to read. And I was never like actively disliking it. It just was never pulling me along. I guess I slap that with like a kind of Tommyknockers-esque is why I'm bringing that up.
I got you. Good to know. Good to know. I could see that happening. Like, I write a paragraph and you write 70 pages. And I'm not a parent, but I would do something like that, I think. Alrighty. I don't know if you already have one of these priceless treasures, but if you had the opportunity to get a Stephen King book signed, only one, which one would it be?
I think it would have to be a Dark Tower one. I think It is probably my favorite of his novels, but there's part of me that like thought It and then said like, oh, that would annoy him. And so I didn't want to do it's just one of like the most common answers, right? Like there's just like, I mean, you're doing the underrated Stephen King stories. Everybody loves It. And so it feels easy to just say it's my favorite novel and get that one signed. So I think it would probably be one of the Dark Tower ones. I think probably Wizard and Glass.
Yay!
But and again, this is a thing that I would love to talk to you about once you get through them. Song of Susanna is the third or the middle of the three that he wrote back to back to back to cap the series off. And it's usually the least liked of those three and often the least liked of the seven. And it's a book I absolutely fell in love with when we covered it on the show.
Okay.
So it's like, that's a book I really would love to get your opinion on when you get to it. But that would be a fun one to pick too, because I bet he would not be expecting that. It's like the shortest of the three. It's very, very short compared to the other Dark Tower books. And most people call it like a transition book. You have everything that happens in book 5, and then you're transitioning to the final book of the series. And so it's like this transitory type story. But it's also absolutely beautiful. And I fell in love with it like I'd never had before for the show. So I'd probably bring that one too and be like, look, I'm serious, Stephen. Look, I like this book. You'd never expect it.
I'm not a plebeian. Look. That's amazing. Oh, that gives me a lot to think about. I will keep that in my piggy bank going forward because I love Susanna. Oh my God. And sometimes I'm just sitting up in bed and I'm like, oh my God, Susanna's pregnant. Like, Susanna's totally pregnant. And she kind of had sex with this like demon thing a couple books ago. And I'm really worried about that. I love Susanna. So I really need to do some hard thinking going forward.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot of fun, I think. With those aspects of those books, for sure.
Favorite Stephen King film or TV series adaptations?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I really am boringly a sucker for Kubrick's The Shining. I really love that story. I mean, I think, we've had debates throughout time of whether it's a good adaptation or not. And ultimately, probably not, but I still think it's just a masterful work. I said Dr. Sleep before, and I really love Flanagan and his work. I think he gets King on a level that I've never quite seen before. And so I really, really loved Dr. Sleep. I really loved his Gerald's Game adaptation as well. Was really into that. I feel like everyone says Shawshank because like that's one of the most beloved movies of all time. Younger, more edgy me like really decided that he didn't like Shawshank because like that was just the most boring favorite movie answer people could have. Like Shawshank and Forrest Gump is like those are people that don't watch movies favorite movies. And so like I got really bent out of shape about that and pretended for years that I didn't really like those movies, which was just a lie. I was just trying to be an edgy film critic, whatever. But I think honestly right now it's Dr. Sleep because I really loved that movie. I loved Mike Flanagan has such balls to do what he does. Like to take on the sequel to a beloved novel and a beloved movie and find a way to, in that sequel, marry that movie and that novel together in a way that I don't think anyone could ever pull off was so wonderful and fascinating to me. I will never get over the choice to just not try to do anything stupid with recasting of characters and just say, we're just going to cast some different people and you're going to just believe those are the characters because this is a movie And that's what people do in movies. You just suspend your disbelief. We don't have to put a CGI young Jack Nicholson on this guy's face for you to know this is Jack Torrance. Like, that, loved all of it. It was great.
He is such a brilliant filmmaker and storyteller, and I'm just so grateful that we have him. I have so much gratitude. Like, thank God we have somebody who's so whip smart and who loves the work as much as we all do to adapt these stories, because man, we don't deserve him.
I think his House of Usher show is coming soon-ish.
Oh my God.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure all the strikes and stuff are probably going to delay it all, because I think it was supposed to be fall 2023, but who knows if it was done. But yeah, I will watch anything Mike Flanagan does. I don't know if you ever watched Midnight Mass.
Girl, yes. I loved the hell out of that. Yeah. I was just frame for frame drooling in my living room. I am obsessed. I go speechless. That's how you know. I'm a chatty Cathy. And when I lose words, that means it's just off the chain. And that was Midnight Mass for me. And that was Haunting of Hill House for me. Yeah. Speechless. The computer crashes when I think about it.
Yeah, we've kind of joked for a long time about, once we finish up our Stephen King stuff, we're just going to do a Mike Flanagan podcast where we just go through everything he does beat by beat, like episode by episode. And I would die a happy man if I got to do that, because there's so much there. There's so much detail in his storytelling and his filmmaking. He's incredible. He's absolutely incredible. I know this isn't a Mike Flanagan podcast, but all podcasts should also kind of be a Mike Flanagan podcast, because he's just that good.
I wholeheartedly support this endeavor, because what he did with Dr. Sleep blew me away. What he did with the other sort of Netflix series. Oh my God, this guy has the Dark Tower. Oh my God. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a drooling fan, and support all Flanagan deep dives.
Yeah, well, let's hope it happens. I'm excited. I'm not letting myself get like too excited until we hear that someone's bought it and it's got a home, and we'll see.
That's wise, because that happened to me with Revival.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh my God, Revival! And so I was freaking out and telling everyone, and I think I jinxed it. I think it was me. I think I broke it, and he lost it, and I blamed myself. So yeah. I too am cautiously optimistic.
And as much as I was a curmudgeon about that book an hour ago, I would have loved to see his take on that. I think that would have been really fascinating.
100%. Yeah. Fingers crossed he's just able to do it all. Like, just do it all. Just do it all, Mike. Thanks. Just a couple more here. We're making our way to the end.
Sure.
Okay. This next one is about your favorite Stephen King. This could be a romantic couple. It could be a team. It could be a bromance, a general friendship. Who's your favorite duo, trio, gang?
Yeah, I think I have to be boring here and just say the Ka-Tet from the Dark Tower. I think that answer encompasses every option you just gave there, which is that, like, the Eddie and Susanna relationship, I just adore. Absolutely. The Roland and Jake relationship, I love. The Jake and Oi relationship, I absolutely adore. And all their interactions, like, it's the perfect, probably a strong word, but it's one of the most wonderful just concepts of the 5-man band trope, where you're having each of these players performing a very specific role within the group, and then getting to see how those roles bounce off each other, and how you can outline the characters' arcs and conflicts through how they're interacting and changing with the different people and how they interact with that group. And you fall in love with them individually, and then you fall in love with them as a group. And it's just fantastically well done. Seeing that Eddie's big moments get to be big moments when he pushes back against Roland. You're just so proud of him for standing up for himself and pushing back, but also, like, to see Roland also respect him for that, because Roland only has one way of being a father, which is a terrible, shitty way he learned from his dad. But also you like it because Roland is so messed up in your head. I just all of it is just great between all of them. It's just so fun to read. On rereads, I've never enjoyed a book on rereads like I have on these, because it's just seeing all those interactions again. It feels new every time. they're playing off of each other. So much of the Dark Tower is just those 4 or 5 people just bouncing off each other in dialogue, and it's so fun every time.
Oh, beautiful. It really is a great improvisation that they all do. I love that about them being a band. It works so well. Beautiful. 2 more questions. This one's one of my favorites because we've got some good ones, some crazy ones, some wild ones. Who are your favorite Stephen King females?
Oh man, I think probably recency bias because I'm reading it right now, but I think Bev would have to be up there. I love her so much. I mean, like the cool thing is on our reread, we haven't even really gotten to the stuff I love about her. Like it's literally just her introductory chapter where she escapes from her abusive husband and heads back to Derry. And even then, I'm just like, oh man, I love this character so much. I think the big thing is I don't think the book lets her down. I think she's an incredible, complicated, wonderful character throughout. There's characters like we talked earlier about Franny, who in The Stand, I think is a great character at the beginning of the story. Like the way King draws this character, you're like immediately fascinated with her. The complicated nature, like how she deals with her boyfriend and the pregnancy and her father and her mother. And like King builds this out so wonderfully. And then the book just kind of leaves her behind, sadly. Like it just that's the thing that bums me out so much is that Franny just becomes incredibly passive in the story, and that just okay, I guess. Like what happened to this incredibly rich, complicated character? I think that's actually one thing that maybe one of the only things that the miniseries remake they did in 20 that I liked was that I felt like the final episode was written by King, and it was almost him like apologizing to the character of Franny by like giving her some agency back at the end of the story, allowing her to do something. It's like one of the only things I liked in that thing, which I did not like at all in it. But I was talking about Bev, and then somehow I started talking about Franny. Sorry. So no, I adore Bev. I love seeing her interactions with the guys. I love, seeing her as this character who comes into this group of a bunch of child dudes and like makes like establishes herself as part of the group. And, she's a really wonderful character. I mean, Susanna, obviously, I love as well. Susanna is such a complex character to talk about because there's so much stuff that King's doing with the Detta and Odetta stuff that some of it has not aged well, right? But it's all really fascinating to me because he's trying to explore this idea with these two characters and how you deal with the worst things that happen to you. And the creation of Susanna is one of my favorite moments in the story because it's like this idea of genre fiction is fun because it allows you to take like ideas and metaphors and just literalize them. And so like it's just like let's just literalize the concept of coming face to face with the worst part of yourself. Like we're just going to literally make that happen, and then we learn something and grow and become something new and better for that experience. And that's what I think King does so beautifully with Susanna. So really like her. He writes so many good women characters, and then some clunky ones for sure.
Great choices. Susanna is she's one of those that absolutely makes me think of Dark Goddess archetype. Oh, wow. Like he's really doing some destroyer goddess stuff in here where we've just got some awesomely powerful nutball women who are these dark deities. So I'm a huge fan of the crazier, the better.
Curious what you thought of Susan from Wizard and Glass, because I've heard a lot of people say that they didn't really care for her as a character.
I really fell into the romance of Wizard and Glass, so I thought she was just the lovely, sweet little virgin girl, like not the girl next door, but like just this beautiful, bright little Disney princess.
Yeah.
And I was really okay with that because it works. She's in this little town and she's kind of married to this. It was very fairy tale in a lot of ways. So she's underdeveloped in that regard, but what she represents is like that beautiful rose that everybody wants. And so she's really valued for her body and her assets, but her heart gets to fall in love with this boy that's around her age, sort of, kind of. And they just have this passionate love affair. And I was so into it. I was like, I don't care. This is amazing.
Isn't it like, going into the story that it's a doomed love affair? Like the book has specifically told you that, and
Yep.
yet you're absolutely swept up into it because he does such a good job with that. And yeah, I agree. Wizard and Glass is a book that operates in archetype a lot because it is trying to do a fairy tale type story. And so a lot of the characters in that story are more archetypes than they are deep, complex characters. Not just Susan. I think a lot of them. Obviously, Roland is the exception to that, and that's because not only are we learning about Roland as a boy there, but it is reflecting on who we understand Roland is today. So he gets to be a little more complicated than that. But I agree. A lot of these characters, like, most of the town of Hambury, like, really operates on kind of a very two-dimensional level, and that works for the story because that's the type of story it is.
I agree. I loved this Western sort of saga that was
Yeah.
going down. I was so into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that they have that romance that works so well. For me, I think I was really upset at the ending just because of Roland's choice. I get it, but I also lose track of how young he is. And I think that was
Yeah.
sort of a problem on my first read is he seems so mature because he's Roland and he's like the quiet, thinking, pensive guy in the corner you have a crush on. I'm so into that. I thought he was older. And then I was so upset with his choice. That's like, okay, sorry, Susan, bye. But I understand, like, this guy's really young. And
Mm-hmm.
the tower is this crazy huge thing, and you gotta let it go. It was romantic, but she's collateral damage and yeah, sad times, but
Yeah. Well, and his life has reinforced that idea, right? Like, all throughout his life, when put up against a hard choice and situation, it's always been sacrifice something you care about in order to get ahead. And so he's just been had that distilled in him. And so it's almost not even a choice for him. He just kind of makes it because of course he's going to. And that's his kind of great sin, his great problem is that he continually makes that specific kind of choice. Yeah, it's great. It's tragic. Like the Charyu Tree moment still
uh
like breaks my heart every time. It's so beautifully written.
yeah. I was dealing with every level of the grieving process. I was in denial. I was angry. I was so upset. I was so mad. I was so mad. And I was just getting angrier and angrier like the first 36 hours after I read it. And so thankfully, Kingslingers did such a beautiful distillation that I was like, my feelings are valid. My feelings are valid and
Yeah.
I'm gonna be okay. And I understand this tower thing. And this thing I just wasn't getting the all-consuming, swallowing nature that the tower revealed itself to Roland. And like, there, that's it. That's it. He's gone.
Yeah.
Roland's gone forever.
Well, and it also serves like I love it as that, and I also love it as this idea that it is the thing that allows him to make every bad choice after that. Because once he makes the choice to sacrifice Susan to the tower, then crying off means that he sacrificed her for nothing. And so like it becomes this sunk cost fallacy thing where like he has to keep going. He has to let Jake go because every move to move away from that becomes, oh, I let this woman I loved die for no reason at all. And then I'm responsible for that. And so like this need for the tower to be something important, this need for his quest to be to save it and save the world is not just about the tower itself, but also about those choices he made and trying to validate those choices post fact.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's so helpful and brilliant. That's huge. I'm gonna chew on that for a while. That's so because I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
I think I still am a little, and I'm really nervous for the Ka-Tet because they all love him so much. And I think they're all gonna die. That's just my hypothesis. I'm just preparing myself. They are all going to be sacrificed for this man's quest. And that sucks. I don't know if it's gonna happen. I just have my hypotheses.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I'm just like, you suck, bro. You make like nobody's worth dying for like that.
What a main character, what a protagonist, right? That like that's the way you feel about him.
Yeah,
And yet you love him at the same time too. It's the
100%.
wildest thing. Yeah.
100%. Like I too would go follow him
Mm-hmm.
if he was like, "Come on, get your stuff. Let's go." Okay, Roland. Okay. Here I come. I'm right behind you. And that's gross. I don't like that I feel like that.
Yeah, but that's what King is so good at is like
Yep.
he's basically like I said he's making that bet and got the confidence in himself to know that it's going to work on you in that way. And to like, I think my co-host Matt like said he has this understanding of people's psychology that we've never quite seen in a writer before, that he just seems to know how people think and how people work and the decisions we make and why we make those decisions. I don't know. It's all really fascinating stuff.
Oh, you're dead on. Absolutely. Yeah, he's tapped in and plugged into some high level human nature stuff that is just fascinating to witness. You're like, how
Yeah.
do you know these things? Especially with women. I'm like, how do you know that? Stop. Get out of here. Like very, very advanced. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, interesting. So glad to have had this time to chat Dark Tower, because these are deeply buried things that got to just come out and be like, oh, okay, I can breathe. My last question to round us out. Tell me your top 3 or your top 5 Stephen King titles. They can be short stories, they can be collections, they could be novels, whatever you want. What are the ones where you're like, all right, these are the ones on the shelf?
Okay. Gosh, this is going to be so boring because it's going to be the ones everyone suspects, but it's definitely going to be it. It's up there at number 1. I think Wizard and Glass will be pretty close behind that one. 11/22/63 is, I think, his modern masterpiece. Like, if anyone thought like King lost something, they just had to read that book and be like, oh, nope, he still got it. I think the trend I'm noticing here as I list these is I tend to like the big, thicker, longer novels, which is surprising because like I really do appreciate like a tight, small, like not even short story, but just like a smaller novel that tells its story really efficiently and effectively. And yet I keep going back to these incredibly big books that I like so much. Those are definitely my top 3 for sure. I'm looking at my list here and seeing if anything else jumps out of me. I think Hearts in Atlantis actually is a really good collection. I think not every story in that works as well as others, but as a collection as a whole, it's really good. We read Low Men in Yellow Coats for our season 2 last year, and Matt fell in love with that and then went back and read the entire book. And I think it's his favorite, if not one of his favorite King books. It's really it's really profound. It's really sad. I love what he kind of is saying about his generation and the disappointment he feels with his generation. I think it's a book, I think it came out in 1999, right? So it's a book like on the age of the new millennium, like a man of the 60s looking back at what happened, what happened to us, and trying to figure that out. So it's a really great story, sure, collection of stories rather.
I love it too. I love that look at the Vietnam generation, and the Vietnam stuff just crushes me in general. And reading it from King's perspective is really, really special and all the more heart crushing.
Yeah, yeah. And then, On Writing is really great. That's like I've read that so many times. But I think the nonfiction, I'm gonna say Danse Macabre, because I am fascinated by this book and I wish he would do a follow-up for modern horror, because, obviously I wasn't around where most of the horror stuff he's talking about. So it's a really great primer on like early 20th century to mid 20th century horror and the state horror is in. And he just writes about it so in his usual King style. Like even when he's writing nonfiction, he's just so relaxed and he feels like he's telling you a story. Like that's the thing. Like the thing we say over and over again about King is that like everything you read from him feels like you're sitting at a bar with a guy having a drink and he's just telling you a story about stuff. And even when he writes nonfiction, he does it in that same way. And so it's some of the easiest nonfiction to read ever. And I picked that up as part of my chronological reread, having never read it before, really no idea what it was. Just like, oh, it's just this nonfiction book about horror fiction and movies. And I read it in like 2 days because I was like fascinated. And I've like he's got a list of everything he mentions in there, and I've like made it my mission of my life to watch every movie he references and read every horror book he references in there. Not doing too great on that right now, but I've got time. It's a really good book that people should check out, and I wish he would do a modern follow-up too.
Oh, I love it. I have it. And I need to get there because I've heard wonderful things. I've heard it is such a cool slice of his mind, and I need to get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, also teaching you a ton about horror as well. Yeah, you get to see a bit of him and then get to learn a lot too.
I love it. Love it so much. And I have loved this whole thing, Scott. Oh my gosh. So one thing I forgot to do at the beginning, because I was like an overly excited pony, could not be contained, just took off right out the gate, is to kind of explain who you are and what you're all about. I was too happy. So we will end with giving us a nice little tell us what you're up to. Where can we find your work? What's going on Kingslingers? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So I guess if you've reached this far into the episode and don't know what Kingslingers are, you're probably really confused. But basically, this was an idea my friend and I had a few years ago, where I was in love with the Dark Tower series. He had never read it, and so I thought it'd be cool to do a really kind of close read, chapter by chapter analysis of the story from our differing perspectives: the perspective of someone who's read it a bunch before, and perspective of someone who hasn't. So our first season, we did all that. We did all 8 Dark Tower novels, and some of the related short stories. We were having too much fun. We came back for a season 2 and did the Dark Tower adjacent stuff. And then right now we're in our 3rd season, which is just kind of throwing the pretense of the Dark Tower away and just saying we want to talk about Stephen King more. So we're doing, I'm calling it like the greatest hits. So basically what I've done is I've picked a book from each of the decades that King has been working in. And then I also picked a short story collection. I also picked a Bachman novel, and I picked one of his crime novels. And so we're just going to work through those bit by bit. We did The Shining earlier. We did The Long Walk. We did Night Shift for our short story collection. And right now we're reading It for the 80s. And we're going to move into the 90s and Desperation in like October or November, because our It series is like 19 episodes long. It's crazy. So yeah, I divide the books into like 70, 80 page chunks, which is enough to give you a lot to talk about, but not enough to where people feel like they have to read for hours and hours and hours each week. And we just go through it and chat about it. And I try to get Matt's opinion as we're going through the book about what he's thinking is going on here, the themes, how it's working on him. We're both just like really into understanding how stories work, and that like I love the feeling that stories give me. I love, even when I'm mad, even when I'm disappointed, even when I'm upset about something, it's like I read something that some guy made up and it made me feel that way. How did it do that? I want to know. I want to understand how he did that. And so that's kind of the thing we approach this to is we have the saying we repeat a few times, which is a little facetious, but we like saying it, is the author is a genius and everything is intentional, which is so like even if something's rubbing you the wrong way, approaching it from the perspective of like, oh, well, he wanted you to feel that way, or this is the way the story wanted you to do it. Like, and it's not saying you have to like everything that you read. Obviously, we talked about some books that I didn't like here tonight, but that's the kind of idea we approach these stories to, as we're analyzing them, is like, he did this on purpose. That person said that on purpose. That person did that on purpose. What is the purpose? How does that reinforce the themes that he's going for, the tone, the mood? How does all this work? And we're having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun doing it.
I am such a huge fan of your show. And thank you guys for putting in all the wonderful effort that you do, because it really shines so bright. And people like me listen to it and are nourished by it. So thank you so very much for what you and Matt do, because I know it's a lot and life happens and you're like, I can't. I'm going to lose it. And then we just get these brilliant episodes that are so helpful. And I think my love affair with King has deepened from some of your guys' work.
No, thank you so much. That's fantastic here. And that's the goal, right? Is that, I think probably the people that listen to the show are already fans of King. Probably. Like, I doubt you'd want to dive into a deep dive podcast if you never really read the guy before. But hopefully the idea is that like you love this guy, and we would just want to help you understand why that is. That what that answer to that question is. Why is he so good at this? Why do I like this writing? And it's really helped me. I mean, that's ultimately we're asking it for ourselves, right? We're not specifically to help other people. It's just like, I love this guy's writing and I want to know why. And it's been such a pleasure, and we're so glad people are enjoying it.
Yeah, I started this little show just talking to my empty living room because I feel that exact same way. So it's so nice to connect with others who are doing the exact same thing. But Once more, thank you, Scott. Please come back soon. Bring your friend Matt. Tell him I don't bite.
Absolutely. And we seriously need to have a conversation when you finish Dark Tower. I'm totally serious about that. We're gonna need to talk about this stuff.
1000%. I will blow up your life because I'm gonna need to talk to somebody. I'm going to be like, excuse me, are you free at 2 a.m.? Because can I verbally process at whatever hour you're available?
Oh man, you're in for such a treat.
Yeah. I'm excited, and it is an amazing journey thus far. It's bumpy. The first is bumpy, but then by the time you get to Wizard and Glass, I'm in it to win it. I really am.
Great.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was absolutely fantastic.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That concludes my time with the wonderful Scott Daly from Kingslingers. Many thanks to Scott for being so rad and fun and bringing all his terrific intelligence and insight. Ugh, so good. Please make sure you're all very much plugged into Doof Media and all things Kingslingers. There are links in the episode notes. But now, boys and girls, you must get ready for interview 2. The very next episode is Kingslingers co-host Matt Freeman. Please head there now to conclude this extra special Blue Moon new Stephen King novel constant reader interview extravaganza. Now hurry up and get. I'm right behind you.